Make sure the home inspector you hire isn't going to cost you money down the road. Today, we're going to talk about what a home inspection is, but mainly how to tell the difference between a good and bad home inspector before you hire one. I'm Dylan Bucknavich with North&Co. I'm a realtor, a former home inspector, a husband, a daddy, and I once ate an entire box of Cheez-Its for dinner. Not proud. Before we start, I need everyone watching this to subscribe, like, and comment so I know these messages I'm sending out are actually being seen. Okay, what do you look for in a home inspector to make sure you are getting the right one? What are the red flags? And what are some questions you can ask before moving forward with one to avoid moving into a home with a handful of questions that turns into a money pit or is full of surprises? In my opinion, hands down, the most important and delicate part of the home buying and selling process is the due diligence period. And the most important part of that is the home inspection. Now, the home inspection is where most deals go to die. Now, some of this is attributed to emotion or miscommunication between the parties, even if the home inspector does a great job. But sometimes it is the fault of the inspector. And I will tell you why that happens and what warning signs are out there that can help prevent you from hiring one of the bad ones. First of all, why am I qualified to tell you this? Well, to recap, in case you haven't been following me, I was a certified home inspector in Arizona between 2005 and 2015. I've inspected well over 1,500 homes, maybe even 2,000. And I'll just skip right over trying to be humble and say I was a very good inspector. I was obsessed with finding out what each home was trying to hide from me. Like, I took it personally. I would access areas of the roof and attic that I could not guarantee I'd be able to get down or out from. Things that would make my wife shiver. And the reports I wrote were about as detailed as you could get. I mean, the photos had photos, but I made a point to make it easy enough to read so that a first-time home buyer would get it. I'm sure there are many realtors out there who cringed at my style or my reports, but even though I was grateful for each referral, I would have realtors tell me things like, oh, let's leave that out of the report, or call me before you send the report out so I can decide if anything needs to be left out. Or my personal favorite, well, sometimes not telling them something is a good thing, right? I'm serious. All of that happened. So, with that being said, I made a point to remind myself that I was working for the buyer, not the realtor or person who referred me. This was way too important of a process to do anything else. Funny thing is, when I was an inspector, I couldn't believe some of the behavior and practices I'd see from realtors. But, and my inspector friends are going to hate me for this, since becoming a realtor, I've been almost as surprised by what I've seen out of some home inspectors. Ones I've used and ones at the other side of the transaction used. So, what do you look for? First, let's cover what a home inspection is, so we don't get into this with inflated expectations. It is not a code inspection. I repeat, not a code inspection. It is a generalized inspection versus a specialized inspection. Meaning, for example, the inspector can test the AC using the thermostat, but if it doesn't respond, they refer the additional evaluation out to a specialist. Or if they see a roof leak, they can look for the source of the leak, but if they can't find it, they will ask you to call a roofer. Same thing with water damage, structural concerns, slow drainage, weird wiring, and the list goes on. It is also a visual inspection based on current conditions. They do not have x-ray vision or a crystal ball. They do, however, have to adhere to something called the Arizona Standards of Professional Practice for Home Inspectors, a copy of which can be found online. It clearly defines what they are required to observe and report, and more importantly, what they are not required to observe and report. So, let's dig in. Now, you may be getting referred to an inspector by your realtor, or you may be finding one online by yourself. Either way, you can verify their certification status. And this can be done through the Board of Technical Registration, my old buddies, at btr.az.gov. The BTR, as we'll call them, are the ones who regulate inspectors and call them in if an issue arises. Next, check reviews on Google or their Facebook page or whatever else is out there. The reason for doing that speaks for itself. Next, check their website, which I hope they have. In this day and age, I'm sorry, even if you're old school, you have to have something where people can find you, stalk you out a bit, and see some testimonials. I guess a Facebook page could suffice, but you have to have access to some other info. And one of those things is a sample inspection report. Now, a report is the final product of the home inspection. It is how the inspector communicates to the buyer and everyone involved in the transaction that'll see it, which includes the seller and the seller's agent. No matter what is said on site, the report is the final word, and each and every home inspector should be proud of theirs. So proud, in fact, that a sample of one be prominently displayed on their website. So, the report. There are what I call styles and types of reports. There are two types of report, checklist and narrative, but let's talk about style first. Style is a bit abstract, but I think you can narrow it down to a confident report and a scared report. Let's start with a scared report. So if you're looking at the report and it's 30 pages of disclaimers about how the inspector is not required to do this and not liable for this, and they suggest having a dripping faucet further evaluated by a licensed plumber with remedy as necessary, instead of just saying fix the damn faucet, then you might have what I call a scared style of reporting. It's the inspector, is he getting into building code and calling items defects that were completely normal when the home was built, like insulation level, lack of GFCI protection in outlets, stair railing requirements, single pane windows. In my opinion, those are safety and efficiency upgrades, not a defect. You can point those out as upgrades, but if the inspector is calling those defects, I find that to be a huge red flag. And the report is almost written only to protect the inspector instead of informing the client. And I am not a fan of that, as you can tell. And if that spooks the buyer into believing something has to get fixed when it doesn't, it could lead to an unsuccessful deal. Of course, there obviously needs to be some protection in the report, but it can easily get carried away. Instead, is the inspector clear, concise, educational? Do they go the extra mile and exceed the standards of practice with their explanation of the issue and possible remedy? Not like that's required, but hey, if you're only wearing 8 pieces of flare when you could wear more, well, you know what I'm saying. Now, back to types of report, checklist and narrative. In the most basic terms, checklist is bad, narrative is good. Checklist is basically what it sounds like. It's a preset form that is filled and checked appropriately as the inspector goes through the home. It may just be a few pages long and not very detailed, at least not enough so that a first-time buyer understands the big picture of the purchase they are about to make. In my experience, checklist reports are meant to be fast and allows the inspector to fit in more inspections in a day. And they tend to have a limited amount of photos. I just see them as a shortcut in the service provided to the client. On the flip side, the narrative report is one that most inspectors use. They take the time out to write out what the issue is, maybe include a photo with some fancy annotations and arrows so you get some visual context in addition to what they're writing about. It is by far the best method. Narrative reports can get up there in pages, maybe 40 to 100 if there are a lot of photos. But hey, you're buying a house, so it's worth a read. And admit it, you've wasted time reading worse online, and you'll be glad you have it once the purchase is complete, as you can always refer back to it later. Okay, moving on from reports, next, call the inspector. No matter what, pick up the phone and call them. I'd start by telling them whether you're a first-time buyer or experienced. Ask them how long they've been a home inspector, which you will already know since you looked it up, but ask them anyway. Now, let's pause. I don't want to sit here and detract anyone from using an inspector who is new to the business, because at one time, I was a new inspector and that would have sucked. But let's face it, experience matters. My instructor once said that you'll start to master the art of home inspection after about 1,000 inspections. And at the time, I thought that was nuts. I figured 100 or so and I'd be cruising. But sure enough, it was almost 1,000 on the spot. And it was like the clouds parted. And I got a level of confidence and assurance, and I knew I was the right choice for anyone buying a home. So next, ask how long they've been working with the realtor that referred them, assuming one did. What that'll do is you'll get an idea of the relationship between them. You'll want to make sure it's more professional than it is buddy-buddy. Now, this may sound obvious, but while on the phone with them, listen to them. Listen to their demeanor. Do they sound nervous, defensive, aloof? Or do they sound confident, proud, and are they empathetic? Do they hear where you're at on the home buying experience ladder? And do they adjust to that to meet your needs? Next, ask what they did before inspections. I mean, they may have had construction experience, and if so, what was their area of expertise? Personally, I think it helps quite a bit to know how everything goes together so you can tell if it's falling apart. But let's pause again. I do want to take a minute here and stress that construction experience is not required or necessary. I just think it's a good idea to see how they became an inspector. For example, when myself and an inspector I was partnering with, we were looking for another inspector to help out. We actually had some bad experiences with inspectors that had construction experience and had a very good experience with one that was a pilot of all things. And he is still out there inspecting away and doing a very good job of it. You just want to feel them out, is all. Finally, a few more bonuses and red flags. Now, this may sound weird, but price is something to look at. If your inspector is the cheapest in town, I'd be a little skeptical. A good, confident inspector knows their worth and knows the work that goes into an inspection. It's not easy work, and a good one isn't out there doing inspection for $200. I'm sorry, they're not. Now, some bonuses to look for are extra certifications and licenses. While I was a certified home inspector, I was also a state licensed wood destroying insect inspector. So basically, I could perform my own termite inspections. Now, as you could imagine, that helped me as an inspector overall. So while not required, it's a bonus to find. But full disclaimer, that was a few years ago. And at the time, termite companies were able to carry home inspectors. I'm not certain if that's still allowed or not. So there you go. I also carried a certification in residential mold inspections. What that really means is that I knew how to inspect a home for the presence of suspected mold growth and conditions that would promote that, and also how to test a home for the presence of elevated mold. And I would use surface and air sampling. And that is where my expertise ended. The samples were sent to a lab to test, and then from there to an analytical specialist who would tell us what the results meant. It would be hard to predict, but you want to make sure an inspector isn't using scare tactics to get you to pay for mold testing or sampling. It should be offered if suspected mold is found, or if you just want to get it done anyway. Now, as far as termite and mold inspections go, there is absolutely no harm in hiring people who only do that, as opposed to an inspector who adds that to their arsenal. I'm just telling you what bonuses you might find in an inspector. So I could go on for days about this. This is my topic and one I'm pretty serious about, but I will stop here. Once again, if you have not subscribed to me on YouTube, stop and do that now. I hope you found this helpful. And if you know anyone who is about to start the process, please feel free to tag them or share this with them. Not if they're working with a Realtor already, though. That's a no-no. All right. I appreciate everyone watching this. I will see you next time.